you're all thinking? Is this the same guy again, or does he just have a really good-looking twin? Just the same guy. It's a pleasure to be back. And I actually think that this part of the discussion is very important because this morning we discussed where AI can play a role in clean tech, but there is an obvious cost, and that is going to be the energy consumption in data centers. And there's a few different challenges that you're going to face when you're looking at data center growth. We covered this a little bit the last time, and that's the incredible energy intensity. So I'm not going to recap that. But if you're looking at the energy intensity of training advanced AI models, there's bad news. It's going to get much more intense. So believe it or not, this bar here is a graph from the IEA. That's where we are today. And this is where the announced capacities are. And they're going to eventually be as much as 3 million households. It gets even more challenging. These data centers are not going to be in the middle of nowhere. They're going to be very proximate to urban centers. Let's take a little bit of a case from the US. If you look over on the left, what is in blue is going to be where there's a significant growth in electricity demand from data centers. Now you look over at the right, and that is the grid interconnection queue, and that's mostly going to be renewables. You see some overlap, don't you? Texas, the PJM grid on the East Coast, that is where there is an enormous backlog. Believe it or not, right now, the backlog for interconnection in the US is bigger than the capacity on the grid. So you've got a small amount of supply chasing enormous demand. When people talk about data centers, they tend to only talk about what happens inside the data center. I think that's a mistake for understanding this trend. You want to view it as a continuum. At the furthest upstream, that's going to be your sources of baseload power. The energy that's going to power data centers in the future, there's debate. Is it going to be small modular reactors? Is it going to be fusion? In the US, we see more geothermal ticking up. You go a little bit further, and there's a ton of activity around processors, semiconductors, and materials to consume less energy at the compute level. Then you go a little bit further midstream, you've got a mini industry that has spurned around power co-location and data center stand-up. In the middle is everything happening inside of a data center. So that's going to be your cooling, which we'll talk a little bit about here today. That's going to be power electronics. That's going to be waste heat to power. A huge stack of technologies to make all of this work. Then you go a little bit further, and you've got power management. And when we get beyond that, there's market-facing services already being developed to reduce the amount of energy in the compute and also to offer low-carbon AI hosting. And something that's really important to note here, Asia Pacific is playing pretty prominently. I won't point out every single company, but we've got two here, New Zealand, China, one over on the far, Ampersand in Singapore, Firmus down in the right-hand corner, another Singapore company. So in terms of compute efficiency and infrastructure, Asia Pacific is already playing very prominently. We've got 3 thematic challenges in making data centers more sustainable. The first is that we need to get them actually stood up. We need to get them constructed and powered. The second is that we have an energy use curve that we need to bend. The third is that even if we do all of that correctly, think of that second or third chart I showed where the energy intensity is going to continue to grow. So let's start by thinking about how we get all of these data centers stood up and ideally sustainably. This is a kind of simplified value chain. What you see here is that there's a number of different models, operations, batchable compute, modular data centers. I'm going to give a very quick case that some of you may be familiar with from the US. This is Crusoe Energy. Crusoe Energy has done something pretty interesting. They've gone and brought data centers directly to the power source. They're doing something at natural gas sites that they call digital flare mitigation. So at times, when natural gas is not being used for power and would otherwise be flared, releasing methane into the air. They're using it to power data centers. And they're also doing this with solar, they're doing it with wind as well. But it's this idea of bringing the compute to the power. I was in a conversation with an investor here yesterday who said, well, that might not even be correct. You probably need to bring the compute to the city and follow with the power. So we're going to be in very interesting times in terms of how you balance for latency and compute and also power. I want to point out a few things that are valuable about Crusoe service, though. They can very quickly stand up data centers. So Lancium is a data center campus operator, but they're also offering low carbon compute. So companies like Avalanche Energy that I covered in the first presentation, an AI for fusion company, Jua, which is an AI-based physics model for the weather that allows for very fast energy trading. These are all being trained on the Crusoe low carbon cloud. I talked in the first presentation that AI needs to solve some of its own problems. And there's a pretty good example here of essentially a consortium forming around Crusoe to lower the aggregate emissions from compute. If we do that correctly, everything that's happening inside of a data center is becoming much more power dense. I will tell you, this graph that I'm about to show you, I apologize, it is already outdated, and I know that because one of the companies that we spoke to about this has already told us so. If you're looking over here on the y-axis, this is the type of cooling that you would use in a data center paired with the maximum rack power that it can serve. And that's just in kilowatts. That's basically how much electricity is being used in the rack. What you see is that past 40 kilowatts per rack, you're going to top out at what you can just do with fans. Then you need to start combining with liquid cooling, which we'll talk about in a minute. These numbers here, when we put this out last year, we were only really conceiving of 120 to 160 kilowatts as a max rack. I can tell you, they're going to go far beyond this. There's discussion that NVIDIA's next chips, they're going to be in market by 2027, be 2 megawatts per rack. It's an astronomical number. So don't worry about getting all the math correct on the right side, but bottom line is that to achieve efficiency in a data center, you're going to need some type of liquid cooling. We've got a couple of approaches here. You've got single-phase immersion cooling, which is a tank filled with non-conductive fluid, likely a kind of mineral oil, and you're just dunking the servers in. You got an advantage there. It's not necessarily that expensive. It has decent heat transfer capabilities, and it's got less of a leakage risk, although your challenge here is that it's very heavy. So you might be able to put it in a building like this, maybe not on the second floor, or maybe not in an older data center to be retrofitted. There's another incarnation of immersion cooling, and that's going to be two-phase. That's still dunking into a non-conductive fluid, but one with a low boiling point, and you're going to leverage the benefits of evaporation. Very good heat transfer properties here. Your cost efficiency is not great because it's a little bit expensive. You can think you're doing a lot of plumbing, a lot of, you're changing the way that things are flowing within your building. And you have a little bit of a risk, not necessarily of leaking because it's non-conductive fluid, but risk of condensation. There's always extra challenges when you've got things changing phase. And your last one is direct to chip, and this is becoming very interesting today. This is essentially piping water onto a cold plate that's on a chip. Water's got great heat transfer properties, but you have to think of the complications there. It's many small tubes and pipes going to a chip. And water is a conductive fluid. So when you've got leakage, this can be highly damaging, and your beautiful NVIDIA servers could get completely destroyed by the water. However, there's a lot of great innovation around making that safe. It's got really good heat transfer properties, although there is a level of customization here, right? However, where you might be able to bring this in is when weight is not a constraint, and you're just putting this into a normal type of server rack, albeit configured specifically for the direct-to-chip cooling. And my message here is that you're going to need some stripe of these, but you have trade-offs to grapple with each one. Something that's very important to understand here is that these are not ebb and flowing with the rest of the market. These are growing. Look at the investments in 2024. Very little other areas were growing. This was growing. Perhaps more importantly is the amount of mergers and acquisitions activity. Tech as a whole is struggling with exits right now. Clean tech is not an exception, but looking at 5+ mergers and acquisitions in 2 years, this is a really hot exit market, if we're seeing any hot exit markets right now. So those in the audience who are investing, take note. This is one of the few areas where we do see a very alive exit market. Say we succeed at all of that, at the cooling and at the baseload power, or at the cooling and at the speed to stand up. Now we've got to figure out better baseload power because these are becoming more energy intensive. Fusion, the joke is that it's always 20, 30 years away, no matter how you see it. But there have been a number of advancements in the past few years. And I noticed something really interesting on the investment chart here, is that like the cooling, this actually rose in 2024. But when we're talking to investors at CleanTech Group, we are hearing that people are just generally more comfortable with the tranches of technological innovation in fusion. You used to have investors funding towards the next small milestone. Now they're understanding we need to fund major amounts of money to get to the next big milestone. This shared knowledge and this common ground is getting money flowing into this space. And I point out another thing. If you look here at the bottom, this is essentially a summary. It's not just the tokamaks and the gray that are getting financed anymore. You've got 12+ reactor types getting financing right now. It's many shots on goal. It's becoming more geographically diverse. This is not just a US story anymore. If you look at the chart there, 2 companies who are on our Asia Pacific list this year, Startoris Fusion here in China, that's a spherical tokamak company, and OpenStar, a levitated dipole down in New Zealand. I would also note that on our 2024 APAC list, we had Kyoto Fusioneering, a Japanese fusion company. So we are seeing Asia Pacific companies in fusion land on this list more frequently. And the way it tends to go with fusion or fission is you're usually firmly in one camp or another. But the good thing about the demand pull from data centers is both are really picking up. If we break this down, investments in fusion by quarter, you see that Q4 of last year was a significant year. And actually, Q1 of this year was quite significant. And it's on the order of what would have been a full year in some previous years. So fission is having a bit of a revival moment, not just through the likes of things like Microsoft reopening 3 Mile Island, but also more investment in the small modular reactors. Seen a few exits here as well. Sam Altman's company, Oklo, did a IPO last year. That was a SPAC. And then Terrestrial Energy just a few weeks ago. And these are 2 different types of reactors. So again, things are really accelerating here. And it's one of the few spaces where there are exits to point to. So let's say we do all of that right correct, and we've got the right baseload power and everything is going well. There's a little bit more bad news, is that extreme weather from climate change is threatening the grid. It's making transmission and distribution a lot more complicated. This graph here on the left, and it's a little bit outdated, shows the capital expenditures by Duke Energy in the US through 2020. So you see they're going up, or they're trending up. And then the outages due to extreme weather events are also trending, and really the amount of CapEx had a little effect. It's very hard to keep pace with the amount of threats to the grid today. So that's where you're going to need more innovation in grid hardening and also to increase capacity. A few things I like on the transmission side, some more innovation happening in carbon composite conductors. This is reconductoring of existing lines, and then also new types of lines using high temperature superconductors. Both of these can increase your transfer capacity, but also can improve resilience to things like extreme weather and extreme heat. I'm reading a great book right now with a little bit of a depressing title called The Heat Will Kill You First. I do recommend it. And one of the things it talks about is the damage that thermal sag is going to cause to transmission. Power electronics and managing flow of power is going to become a lot more challenging with data centers, given the sheer amount of economic value taking place inside of data centers. A company we saw in Singapore last week, also on our APAC 25 list, Ampere Sand, is essentially a solid-state transformer that looks like a server rack. So it's able to isolate faults and loads, and it's able to reduce points of failure. It's kind of an interesting concept, a server rack of transformers serving server racks of processors in the facility, but what a time to be alive. So how do you make sense of all the different trends? I really think it's important to understand that the hyperscalers today are frankly just price inelastic. And this is a moment that the folks who are going and selling into those are really benefiting from. And it's become a de-risking sandbox. A lot of hard tech, a lot of deep tech is seeing a moment where it can deploy and start to accelerate a few years ahead of schedule. I would expect much of this to roll out in waves. Of course, when you talk geothermal, any kind of new nuclear, be it SMRs, fusion, it's going to be controversial. But we're not talking about those powering data centers tomorrow. We're talking about those meeting that accelerating pace of energy intensity. And I would also expect this to be very global. I do not think there's a clear winner in some of these technology sets. As we saw there, there's a mix between the US, China, Singapore. These are global markets, and many folks have a strong vested interest in establishing supply chains and having the right infrastructure for compute in their home country. So hopefully this has been informative, maybe a little bit provocative, and I look forward to engaging all of you through the rest of the day. Thank you very much.